Hey everyone, and welcome to WDIM Plus, where today I will be exploring the first season of the new Netflix series Jupiter's Legacy, based on the independent comic book series by Mark Millar and Frank Quitely. Mark Millar is best known for his work with Marvel, where he was responsible for the original Civil War storyline, as well as the Old Man Logan storyline, both of which were adapted as feature films. He has also written The Kingsman, Kick-Ass, Wanted, Superman Red Son, and one of my favorites, Nemesis, among many others. The showrunner of the series is Stephen S. D. Knight, who did a great job on Daredevil for Netflix, and I think you can see a lot of his influence in the first season. Jupiter's Legacy is also an amazing comic, and the series really just scratched the surface of it, having only shown around 40 pages, or about 3 issues, in the first season of the live-action series. There are also a few other noticeable changes made to the Netflix series as well, and here I'll go over some of those as well as some other questions you probably have about the characters and the storyline. Towards the end, I will discuss what happens in the comics after this season, so if you don't want to know, you can click away then. But as I said, the series is changing things from the comic storyline, and even Mark Millar himself, who is also a producer on the series, has said the series will make changes. The first season jumps between 2 time periods, but in each we follow a character named Sheldon Sampson, also known as the Utopian. Josh Duhamel plays the character at first as an optimistic capitalist before the market crash, as well as a heavy wears the crown type leader of our superhero team known as the Union of Justice in the present day. Interestingly enough, both the failure of his father's business as well as the team he leads in the future being at odds stem from his inability to assess the environment around him and being a slave to his ideals. This flaw is juxtaposed later by various characters throughout the tale, and this story is at its best when it examines the burden of being held to different standards and how it affects the lives involved. We even hear the famous line, "With great power comes great responsibility," and each major character in this story understands this in a very different way. After Sheldon and Walter's father commit suicide, Sheldon begins seeing visions of his father and starts drawing various objects compulsively. His good friend George Hutchins, played by Matt Lanter, tries to help him and eventually begins to understand that Sheldon may be onto something with his drawings. In one vision, Sheldon sees 6 people sitting around a table, and they happen to be him, his brother, George, as well as Grace Kennedy and Fitz Small. Grace, played by Leslie Bibb, is a reporter who had broken a story about Sheldon's father that led to his suicide. And she, along with Fitz Small, a young man whose father worked for Sheldon's father, agree to go on the voyage after Sheldon lies to them about the nature of the trip. Along the way during a storm, they find a man adrift, and this happens to be Richard Conrad, played by David Hirsch, who is the 6th person that Sheldon saw in his vision. They find the island after facing many trials, and they enter a chamber that seems to transport them to an alien world. There they are all given powers, and it seems like in the series that the people on the boat may have been imbued with powers, or perhaps they passed them along to their offspring. One of the ways the series differs from the comics is that there are a lot more people with powers in the Netflix series, as in the comics they make it seem like only the descendants of the original 6 travelers have powers. Each of the 6 have some of the same type of powers, which include a certain level of invulnerability, flight, and super strength, agility, and sight. Each also seem to have one heightened ability in some way, with Sheldon being the most powerful and also being able to shoot laser beams from his eyes. His wife Grace is able to tell when someone is lying. Fitz can shoot energy blasts from his hands. Richie has a power rod that can shoot energy. Walter can read minds, and George has a genius level intellect. In the present day, we also meet the younger generation of superhumans, and specifically the children of Sheldon and Grace, Chloe and Brandon. In the comics, I would say that Chloe is probably a bit closer to her character than Brandon is, as in the series he is shown to want to live up to his father's legacy, but in the comics he is mostly just partying during this time. The comics spend a lot of time showing how apathetic the next generation is, and we do see that as well in the Netflix series, but we also see that there are a few still trying to live up to the legacy of the Union of Justice as well as the Code. The Code is the golden rule of the Union, and that is that they never kill no matter the circumstances. In this way, I always thought that this made the Utopian more Superman than Superman, as even Kal-El cannot live up to this standard. In the comics, the 2 children of the Utopian and Lady Liberty are probably the 2 most important characters by the end and go through a lot of development. Think about how far Jon Snow and Daenerys Targaryen went in Game of Thrones from where they started out, but with them knowing they are brother and sister, so no funny stuff. Another big part of this story is Walter, aka Brainwave, played by Ben Daniels. In the first season, we see the first steps of his major plan start to fall into place, and I'm glad that they are not playing out his story the same, as he is responsible for some of the biggest moments in the story, and it would be cool if the Netflix series is able to pull them off and still shock the audience. I know that right now a lot of people are saying that Homelander from The Boys is the worst after what he has done on that show, and with good reason, but I have a feeling that after the 2nd season of Jupiter's Legacy is released, that Brainwave will take over as the most diabolical and powerful character in a series like this. During the first season, in the present day, we see that a clone of Darkstar, one of the worst villains the Union has ever faced, is set against them and kills many of the young heroes before Brandon kills him in an act of self-defense. As the Utopian stands for the code above everything else, he sees this as not only a betrayal of this standard, but also since Brandon is set to one day take over for him, it is also a sign that his ideal may not be kept alive after he is gone. Brandon continues to struggle with his place in this world, as does his sister Chloe, who chooses to ignore her destiny and instead live her life as a party girl. Both are seen as less than their parents, even though they each live completely different lives, and while they share the trauma of being raised under the same roof, they seem to be unable to communicate. Before long, the audience learns that it is in fact Walter who has been working behind the scenes to create this rift between Sheldon and his children, and that he created the clone of Darkstar. His daughter, who is also a telepath, learns of this, and Walter kills her so that his plans may not be put in jeopardy. Now, this is a big change from the comics, as Walter does not kill his daughter, and she instead assists him with his plan, so I wonder which character will take her place now in the series. Another character that was shown briefly in the first season, but is much more important later in the story, is Dr. Barnabas Wolf, played by Paul Amos. Wolf not only has the power to manipulate inorganic matter, but he is also a genius-level problem solver. So he's kind of like if you gave Sherlock Holmes powers akin to Magneto. In the series, he assists with the autopsy of the clone of Darkstar as the group tries to learn more about the creature. Walter appears to risk his life in order to help the Union, but as he is the mastermind behind the ruse, he is really just there to point the blame somewhere else. The person that Walter attempts to frame for this is the former hero Skyfox, aka George Hutchins. These two have had a long-standing rivalry, as Walter was as jealous of George before they got powers as he was of Sheldon, and I'm sure that he sees hurting him as a way of hurting his brother as well, even though his brother always seems to take Walter's side over George. In the past, George leaves the group after he decides that living by the code and not getting involved in politics is irresponsible, and is there during the 1965 Watts riots and gets the police to stand down. He also kidnaps the vice president in an attempt to end the Vietnam War, and this labels him a supervillain, and he is eventually caught by the Union and put in a supermax prison. Since he designed the prison himself, he is able to escape and is not heard from for some time. George's son Hutch is also a big part of the later part of the story, and while he does not have any powers like his father did build him a power rod that allows him to teleport wherever he says. We see him enter into a relationship with Chloe, and the pair have to deal with the Romeo and Juliet dynamic of being the children of the world's greatest superhero and supervillain. Okay, so now I'm going to go into some things that happened in the comics after this, so if you don't want to be spoiled at all, then turn away now. But as I said, they do plan to change things for the Netflix series, so while I do expect the major moments to go down as it did in the comics, I also expect some surprises as well. The battle with Darkstar is just the beginning of a plan set in place by Walter to tear a wedge between Sheldon and his son. While Walter and George never did get along, Walter eventually starts to agree that the code is outdated and that they are destined to rule the world, not just save it. Although unlike George, who takes a more pragmatic approach to helping the public, Walter is more devious and uses people against one another to get what he desires. His plan is to install a puppet regime that he can control from behind the scenes, and Brandon is the key to this. By turning Brandon against his father, he is able to convince him that his father is the one that needs to be destroyed, and Walter is able to persuade him and other superheroes to team up to defeat the Utopian. In the end, it is Sheldon's own son that deals the final blow and kills him, and in a very Anakin Skywalker to Emperor kind of way, Brandon looks to Walter for guidance as he is now the leader of the free world. Chloe is living with her mother during this time and has given birth to a son. The boy's father is Hutch, but like his mother is born with powers. Chloe witnesses Walter kill her mother, and then he attempts to kill her, but her and her family are able to escape thanks to Hutch's ability to travel anywhere in an instant. They live on the lam for a while as their son develops powers, and eventually they are able to overthrow Walter and Brandon, after Chloe is able to show that she is more powerful than Brandon and defeats him in battle. Their son becomes the new Utopian, Chloe becomes the new Lady Liberty, and Hutch takes over his father's mantle as the new Skyfox. It is really a great ending and a very good story, and if they do the big death in the second season, I can see the popularity of this show going through the roof. I have been reading some of the reviews, and knowing the comics, I just hope that people who think the first season was slow tune in for the second. The story itself is not that long, so if they do want to go 4 or 5 seasons, then they are probably going to have to include some of the juicier scenes next season. I keep thinking back to the Umbrella Academy and how a lot of people were lukewarm on it after its first season, but really came around after the second. And I think that this series will have a similar effect. Let me know in the comments what you thought of this first season, and if you're excited for the future of the series. I hope that you enjoyed this video, and please hit that like button if you did, and subscribe for more weekly videos. Thanks for clicking on this one, and I will see you next time on What Did I Miss?